All right, AP Environmental Science. This is the last lecture video for Unit 3. It's topic 3.9, which is over a concept called demographic transition, which is kind of a big topic, kind of a big picture type of thing that really, I think, does a good job explaining, how we got to this point, having 7.8 billion people on the planet. It also kind of gives us an indication sort of where we're headed in the future. So it's kind of a good way, I think, to cap off Unit 3. So one thing about all this stuff that we've been talking about recently with population sizes and different countries and things like that is that different countries, their populations, they're not stagnant. I mean, these are things that fluctuate all the time. I mean, I don't care if you look at the United States or let's say the country that you guys picked for these assignments that you've been doing the last couple of days. Whether it be Greece or France or Ireland or whatever country you want to talk about. Populations are constantly changing, and as the populations of certain countries change, this has an impact on the population of the world. So if we're serious about 7.8 billion people on the planet like being too many, then we have to look at specific countries and say, okay, that country's population is exploding. We need to look at them and figure out ways to stop their population from going up so much, because that will help limit the overall population growth of the world. So we have to look at individual countries. So demographic transition is kind of a way to kind of pinpoint where certain countries are in different stages of growth. Population change is often associated with economic and societal changes. So that's one thing to understand, is that as these populations change or they shift, then the economics of that country and the societal norms of that country also change. We'll see that with some specific countries in a couple of minutes. As a country moves from developing to the developed or a more developed situation, there's a predictable shift in population demographics, things like birth rates and death rates. So we call this whole thing demographic transition because, again, as countries are moving from, let's say, a developing country to a developed country, then the dynamics of the country change, the demographics change, and it's very predictable. We can see what's happening in certain countries around the world as they're shifting from one stage to the next. So let's take a look at the different stages of demographic transition, and you'll kind of know a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So, every country right now on this planet, yesterday and the day before when you guys were doing your population homework, I asked you guys to pick a specific country. And some of you guys, I guarantee you picked countries that are in stage 3. You didn't know this, but you picked some. Some people pick countries that are in stage 4. Some people pick countries that are in these earlier stages of demographic transition. Now, the reason why they're in those specific stages really has everything to do with birth rates and death rates. That's really what it has to do with. In fact, this entire model is all based on birth rates in the country and death rates in the country and what's happening to those things over time. So let's kind of start over here with stage 1, which is called the pre-industrial stage. And you'll kind of notice that for each stage, I have these different shapes of different age structure graphs. And you might remember back from my lecture on this that different shapes kind of give us an indication of what that age structure is like in that particular country. But anyway, let's say we have a country in stage 1. Okay. Now in stage 1, and I'll be honest with you, there really aren't very many countries on this planet that are in the early stages of stage 1, because these would be countries where the birth rates are extremely high. So you notice this green line here, how it's kind of high. Okay, over here, it's like way lower down here, right? So, I mean, there are countries that have high birth rates, okay, like a lot of African countries, for example. But to be a true stage one country, the death rate in those countries also has to be extremely high. Now, the only time that we really see this is if we have a country that's just torn apart by war or maybe diseases. Sometimes you'll see that, like maybe some of these African countries, but for the most part, there really aren't very many countries left today that have very high birth rates and very high death rates. And the reason why is because death rates are usually coming down a little bit because of modern medicine. You know, you might have a country in Africa who might be in the very late stages of stage one, and that means that their death rate is starting to come down a little bit. But most of the time, you don't see too many countries like this. Okay. Now, stage two is a much more common situation. You know, today we actually have a lot of countries. In fact, just about the entire continent of Africa is in stage two. Now, stage two, again, you'll notice that this birth rate line is fairly high. So these countries, they're having a lot of kids. This isn't like low fertility rate. These are like pretty high birth rates, high fertility rates for women. Now, you will notice at the end of stage two how that line is starting to come down. And that is critical as a country will eventually transition into stage three. But in stage two, these birth rates are fairly high. Now, the one thing that you will notice in stage two, how it differs from stage one, is that the death rate is starting to drastically drop. Now, that's mainly because of, again, modernized medicine. It could be advancements in food production and agriculture. People in these countries just aren't dying as much as they used to. Because these countries that are in stage two, at one time they were in stage one, right? But for whatever reason, their death rate has plummeted. Now, I want you to pause for a second and think about what impact that has on population growth. All right. I mean, these countries that are in stage two, they are growing tremendously. All right, these countries typically have sort of your pyramid shape of growth to their age structure, but these again are countries who, because their death rates have dropped and their birth rates are still high, you get tremendous population growth in those countries. Yeah, I'll make this statement. If we're serious about that 7.8 billion, and we want to find ways to stop it from going up so much, these countries in stage two are the ones that we have to look at the most because they're the ones that are growing so quickly. So if we want to, you know, stop those countries from growing, then I guess we can do one of two things. We can like shoot them back to the Stone Age, back in stage one. That would be kind of inhumane. Or we can get them and advance them into stage three as quickly as possible. Now, in stage three, you'll notice that this birth rate line is starting to drop. And again, there's a few reasons why that is. Why do birth rates in countries come down? Well, it has a lot to do with women and the status of women in the country. You know, um, just having job opportunities for women. We've talked about that before. Educational opportunities for women, women having access to birth control, family planning, all that type of stuff are reasons why birth rates will plummet, right? Women are having less children. So the birth rate in stage three is starting to catch up to that already low death rate. And that's how we'll get countries like the United States, for example, and a lot of other countries in the developed world that end up having age structure pyramids that look like this instead of like these two, right? So we're seeing this transition as we go from stage one, which there aren't really that many countries anyway, stage two, which there currently are a lot of countries, and then eventually into stage three. This would be more of a developed world situation. When countries get to the end of stage three, you'll notice that their birth rates and their death rates are almost equal, right? And then we're ready to go into to stage four. And when you get into stage four, I mean, these are countries where, in some cases, the birth rates are below the death rates. So that means more people are dying in that country than are being born. So you'll get almost this kind of upside down shape to the pyramid where the base of it is actually very thin compared to other areas or other age groups in that particular population. So, again, stage three and even into stage four, these are characteristics of developed countries. Whereas stage two and even into stage one, these are more of your developing type of situations. Okay, so understand each of these stages. So let's kind of go through them kind of individually again. Stage one, you have high birth rates and high death rates. You have fairly stable population growth because both of those things are both fairly high, right? So you don't get a lot of growth in those countries. Um, Again, this is typical of countries who have yet to modernize. We don't have very many countries that are in stage one. Some countries that are in stage two have actually gone in reverse. And that mainly is because of war and disease. I've talked about that before. Really good example is the country of Lesotho. They've actually been almost shot back to the Stone Age, all because of war in that country. High infant mortality rates, very short life expectancies. These are all characteristics of stage one. High fertility rates. Um, the economy in those types of populations is typically what we call a subsistence economy. What that basically means is that this is sort of a hunter gatherer society. Money is not really valued very much because there isn't any. We read the article, less than $500 per year. I mean, that's just the norm in these types of countries. Stage one is typical of a subsistence economy. So is stage two, to be honest with you. There really isn't much value on the dollar until you start transitioning into stage three. Then economics becomes a much bigger value. Stage two, again, transitional. Death rates begin to decline. So our death rates are going down, but our birth rates are still fairly high. Again, this results in huge population growth. This is the biggest reason why India got so big. These countries, though, are starting to modernize. They're still developing countries, but they're getting, for example, better sanitation. It may not be to the level of the U.S., but they're getting better. Better healthcare, more vaccinations, cleaner drinking water, more access to food. Again, these are things that are starting to occur in this transitional stage. So, I mean, all of these are all good things. But when you've got high birth rates and lower death rates, these are the reasons why, again, you get these countries who are starting to just explode population wise. A lot of your African countries are in stage two. They're becoming more modernized, but their birth rates are still very high, and their death rates are fairly low, or they're becoming lower. Um, this is, I think, kind of important. A country will remain in stage two until a couple things happen. Its economy and its educational system have to improve. And if those two things don't, then countries are going to be stuck in stage two. So I want to go back really quick to this, just the overall kind of picture here. We get these countries who are here. I think about those countries in Africa. They are not going to advance unless their economy shifts, and also educational opportunities get much better, especially for women. Okay, so women are, I think, sort of the key to that transition into stage three. Once those countries figure that out, then those countries will again eventually or slowly transition themselves again into stage three. Countries in stage two have the biggest impact on global population growth. So if we're serious about the 7.8 billion, we got to really look at those countries in stage two. Now, stage three is your industrial. Now, again, stage three, especially at the end of stage three, we'll get some stability to population growth. The educational systems are becoming more stable. The government, the economy is more stable. People are looking at money a lot differently in stage three. I mean, there's a reason why people in the United States, for example, don't have 8 or 9 kids per family. I mean, there are some. That's kind of rare. You don't see very many families with 8 or 9 kids. You see most families with maybe 2, maybe 3 kids. But a lot of that has to do with money. It's. I mean, I got 2 kids of my own. I don't have 8 kids, not because I don't like kids. It's just because I can't afford to have 8 kids. I can't afford to spend, eight, or I can't afford to send 8 kids to college, or pay for 8 weddings and all that. I mean, it's crazy. So when you get into stage three, economics becomes a big factor, compared to, let's say, stage one, stage two. Longer life expectancies of people. This is kind of a big deal. Higher ecological footprints. People who are in stage three, right, where we're using a lot more technology, we are using more resources. So our ecological footprint is going to be a lot higher compared to, let's say, somebody who is living on $500 a year, right? In stage one or stage two of demographic transition. All right, stage four, post-industrial. Again, these are countries who have extremely low birth rates and extremely low death rates. There are some countries around the world. Japan's a really good example of one. In fact, Japan's kind of interesting. They've actually taken sort of the opposite route of China. They actually are giving financial incentives to people to have more kids, because they're actually afraid that their population so much, because in countries like Japan, there just isn't enough younger people to take care of the older people. There's a big fear that, like, for example, nursing homes, they don't have people to work in them because the country is so old and there aren't a lot of young people to take care of the elderly. There's less workers to even enter the workforce. So, I mean, like, they're having trouble filling jobs in countries like Japan. So they have sort of some interesting problems. Whenever countries get into that stage four, they've got some interesting issues that they have to tackle, because there's just less people coming in to the country, less inputs, because there's less births. So that's kind of an issue in stage four. Our last couple things here I want to discuss with this topic. I want to go back to this graph here. This one here is showing us ecological footprints, and it's showing you just different countries around the world. We've done ecological footprints before. This is how much land area an average person uses, worth of resources, that type of thing. And you'll notice, like, the United States, like, we're way up there. Our ecological footprint is really high. Canada, Australia, I mean, Germany, Japan, whatever. You got countries like Haiti and India. These are extremely low ecological footprints. Um, Couple stats here. 1/5 of the human population, so think about that, 1 out of every 5 people in the world lives in developed countries like the US. So you can also look at it as 4/5 of the world lives in developing countries, right? So it says here, the 1/5 that lives in developed countries, these people consume more than half of the world's energy. So 20% of the world, that's 1/5, is using 50% or more of the world's energy resources. Things like coal and natural gas and all that type of stuff. So we're using a lot of that stuff. It says 9 out of 12 of the most populated countries are developing countries. What will happen when those countries become developed? So this is like big picture stuff right here. Think about, just think about, I don't know, the continent of Africa. If all of those people, that entire continent, if they become developed, if they get into stage 3, let's say, of demographic transition, think about what that's going to do to their ecological footprints. Because if you get into stage 3, your ecological footprint's going to be much higher. So you're using a lot more resources, right? So, think about the impact that would have on the planet. So I think we have to look at, okay, there's a lot of people on this planet, but most of the people on this planet are in like stage 2 of demographic transition. What's going to happen when they get into stage 3? That to me is the scariest thing to think about, because now you've got billions of people who are living a stage 2 lifestyle, and if they ever get out of stage 3, then they'll be living a stage 3 lifestyle, and the impact that has on the planet could be, we may not be able to recover from it. I don't know, but it's kind of scary to think about. The last thing here today is something called the IPAT equation. The IPAT equation says it's used to, it's kind of a hypothetical thing, but it says it's used to estimate the impact of human lifestyle on Earth. And here's the equation. It's there's 4 variables that are involved, and even though it's kind of written mathematically, it's kind of a conceptual thing. So let's kind of go through these 4 variables here real quick. Impact, it says here, it's the overall effect of a human population on the planet. So let's just say the population of the United States versus, let's say, the population of Nigeria or something. Okay. Now, that impact, according to this equation, is there's 3 things that factor in. One of them is population. How many individuals are there? So, for example, 2 people have more of an impact than one. So the bigger the population, I guess, the more impact that population is going to have on the planet. So I guess we can look at, let's say, China. China has more people than the US. So they would have a bigger impact on the planet than us if you just look at that variable. Affluence. The more affluent, more money, goods, and property, the higher the environmental impact. Now, you take an average Chinese citizen versus an average American citizen, and it's not even close, right? Americans are much more affluent than a lot of other populations around the world. So think about the United States. Not only do we have a lot of people in the US, but we're also fairly affluent. Like, we have a lot of money, we have a lot of goods, a lot of property, we buy a lot of things, right? So those are 2 big things. And then finally, technology. Now, when we think of technology, we think about like computers and stuff like that. But the way that they define technology is only destructive technology is accounted for. Now, destructive technology in environmental science is a technology that produces pollution. So, like, for example, electricity generation. Every time you turn on a light switch, trust me, there's pollution involved. Every time you start your car, trust me, there's pollution involved. So those are destructive technologies. So think about the United States. All right, we got a lot of people, we're very affluent, and we use a lot of destructive technology. So according to the IPAD equation, the impact, by the just the population of the United States is pretty big on the planet. You look at like Nigeria, they might have a lot of people in Nigeria. I don't know what their population size is exactly, but they're not very affluent. Those people aren't using a ton of destructive technology compared to the US. So their impact is going to be a lot less, right? Their environmental impact. So I want us to understand what these four variables are, um, and kind of what this IPAD equation represents. Again, it's not really mathematical, it's more conceptual. All right, guys, thanks for hanging with me there. That's a big lecture. Watch it again. Have a good day, everybody.